Hello everyone and welcome to this afternoon's virtual event, The Non-Law Dilemma with Bird and Bird, Dentons and BPP. Great to see so many of you joining us today. My name is Jamina and I'm an events coordinator here at Legal Cheek. I will be handing over to the panel shortly, but first to explain a bit more about today's event. This is the fourth in a series of 8 SQE events we're doing in partnership with BPP. If you missed any of the previous sessions, you can head over to the SQE Hub on Legal Cheek, where you can find the video recordings for the previous sessions, as well as the SQE-themed editorial pieces that have accompanied the events. One of the team will put a link for you in the chat, so do click on that and check it out after the event. Now, over the next hour, the speakers will be explaining all about the SQE and qualifying work experience, and specifically what this means for non-law graduates. After this, there will be an hour of virtual networking in the expo part of the platform, but I will explain a bit more about that later on. Now, before we begin, everyone in the audience, make sure your chat is set to stage, as this is where you can type in your questions and comments for the speakers over the course of the panel discussion. I would now like to welcome Johnny Hurst, Head of Outreach at BPP and former City Law Firm partner, onto the stage. Hi, Johnny.
Thank you so much, Jamina.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very well indeed. Very much looking forward to this session.
That's great.
I love interacting with non-lawyers and converting them to become lawyers. Yeah, very much looking forward to this session. So
That's
I think we were
great.
just going to chat about a couple of things before we got started. So have you got any questions
That's
for me?
correct. Yes. So just to begin, could you tell us a bit more about what the SQE is?
Yes, of course. So, and this is something that I realise that there are a lot of people out there that know about the SQE, but there will be some people who've only just come to the idea of converting as lawyers. So it's important that we'll take it back to the first base. So, what is the SQE? Well, it's the end point assessment that all candidates will need to pass in order to qualify as a solicitor in the future. What that means is that anyone who wants to qualify as a solicitor must pass through the SQE gateway, so to speak, and that means taking 2 assessments, which are called SQE1 or SQE Part 1 and SQE2 or SQE Part 2. SQE1 is 2 papers consisting in totally of multiple choice questions that are answered on a single best answer basis. So they're quite quick. You have to turn them around over the course of, I think it's 10 hours worth of exams or thereabouts. That's for Part 1, SQE Part 1, and they cover a lot of what we call black letter law, but also practice areas as well, amongst other things. And if you've passed SQE Part 1, you can then take SQE Part 2, which is focused on skills, oral skills and written skills, but it will draw upon all of the law and practice areas that you've covered on SQE Part 1. And these are 16 assessments of a variety of skills, written and oral, as I've said. It's very different, the SQE, compared to its predecessor, the LPC, because the LPC were exams that were set by individual universities where you chose to study, whereas the SQE is a central assessment that is owned by the Law Society, and they've contracted out the running of the assessments to an organisation called Kaplan. And so everybody will sit the same exams going forward. But how you prepare for those assessments, which universities you go to, which courses you do, is a very much more complicated beast than was the situation for the LPC. And we'll try and unpick some of that during the session today. Sorry, a very long answer to a short question there, Jamina, but hopefully that's given a little bit of background as to what the SQE is.
Definitely, that's great. Thank you very much. And then next up, could you just explain what qualifying work experience means?
Absolutely. Now, I said that the SQE is the endpoint assessment that you need to get through to qualify to be a solicitor, but you're not qualified as a solicitor at the point you pass that assessment. Well, you may not be anyway, because by the time you apply to qualify and be registered as a solicitor, you need to have acquired 2 years of qualifying work experience. You may have heard the phrase a training contract. I'm sure many of you do know that. That's currently what is required. And that's also a 2-year work experience in a law firm. But qualifying work experience could be very much like a training contract, 2 years in a single law firm, but it can be acquired by accruing or aggregating work experience in a variety of legal employers, up to 4 in fact, so that it's much easier to qualify down the SQE route by getting the qualifying work experience, because it's easier to get in paralegal roles and trainee roles as well, whereas there were, I think, fewer opportunities for training contracts under the old system. So that's the good news. I think that the trickier part of the new SQE regime is the assessments, because they are assessed at a higher level than the LPC. They're assessed at the standard of a day one qualified solicitor rather than a day one trainee. So from your point of view, yeah, parts of the assessment process, qualification process is simpler. Part of it's more challenging. So hopefully that's given you a bit of background of what QWE, or qualifying work experience, is.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Johnny, for that great introduction. And now let's get started with the panel discussion. So I would now like to invite Rosie Buckley, Early Careers Recruitment Lead at Dentons, to the stage. And we will also be momentarily joined by Rachel Boyle, Early Careers Officer at Bird & Bird, but she's just experienced some technical issues, but I'm sure she'll be here in just one moment. So now, Johnny and Rosie, please do feel free to get started.
Thank you so much, Jamina, and I'm sure Rachel will be joining us in a moment. Well, Rosie, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon in this series of SQE webinars that we at BPP are delighted to run in conjunction with Legal Cheek. It's great to have Dentons, one of the many firms that send their students to BPP, joining us today. Do you want to give us a little bit of background in terms of what your role is at Dentons, maybe other roles that you've had that are relevant, and maybe explain just very briefly about the work that Dentons does, so students who aren't familiar with the firm can just have a bit of background there.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Johnny. And yeah, really happy to be here discussing it. As you say, a lot of acronyms and things that students might not have access to. So hopefully we can help with understanding some of the bits you'll be hearing about. But yeah, my name is Rosie. So as mentioned, I'm the Early Careers Recruitment Lead at Denton. So essentially what that means is I look after recruitment for most of our entry-level roles. So apprentices, vacation schemes, training contracts, that sort of thing. And I've been working in early careers for almost 10 years now, so in various different law firms, so a few different perspectives there as well, if any questions sort of call for that. And a little bit around Denton. So you might have heard of us as the world's largest law firm, so we are hugely international offices all over the world. And also a word you've probably heard in relation to Dentons is polycentric, which I only ever hear in relation to Dentons as well. So yeah, if you're interested in finding out more about us as well, definitely have a look at our Early Careers website, because there's a lot of information on there as well.
Thank you so much, Rosie. And I can see that we've got some questions that have come up in the chat already. If you don't mind, what we'll probably do is to try and get through a series of questions that we've got ready in advance, because we will be answering a lot of the questions that I can see that have already come up on the screen. And insofar as we don't answer your question, what we've done is to create on Legal Cheap's website an FAQ section. So if your question doesn't get answered today, what we'll make sure is that we add your question to the FAQ. So all questions will be answered either today or within a few days on Legal Cheap's website. So should we get cracking then, Rosie, and just think about well, what firms are thinking about at the moment when it comes to the SQE. I've got a question number 3 here that I think we're going to ask now. So when do you think most firms would have switched from the LPC to the SQE? Because at the moment, a lot of students can still go either way and are preferring to do the LPC. But I think the point to make really clearly to the audience is, if you haven't yet started your law journey, you will definitely be going down the SQE route, which is one thing we ought to say. So when do you think, for those firms who are still not committed, that they're going to switch?
Yeah, really good question. And there's probably not one straight answer, unfortunately, which I know is what everybody probably wants. I would say, so the way we talk about starting as well would be intake. So what do we mean by that is the year you start at working at the law firm. So I appreciate that can be a little bit confusing. So I think for Denton specifically, we will be starting the SQE for any trainees who are due to join us in 2024, which means they'll be kicking off the SQE in 2023, which is creeping up on us now. I don't know where time goes. So So that's how it's working for Denton. So essentially the people we're hiring now, the applications that people will be submitting now will be going down the SQE route. Different firms will have different dates. So some might go slightly later. There's only 1 or 2 going a little bit earlier than that. But if you're applying now, and especially as a non-law student, I think it's likely to say you'll probably come across the SQE rather than the LPC as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you haven't actually started your GDL or Pgdl or
Yeah.
law conversion course yet, you'll definitely be going down the
Yes.
SQE route, because the transitional provisions work that way. It's interesting, isn't it? Because some firms have committed to the SQE this year. So BPP work with what's known as the City Consortium of Firms, which includes Linklaters and Herbert Smith, Norton Rose, Slaughter and May, and a few others. But a lot of firms still haven't made any announcement yet as to when they are going to switch. And I think, in fairness, it's probably because, well, I don't know. What do you think? Because of course there must have been a time when Dentons were thinking, we're not sure. What was holding people back a lot of the time, do you think?
Yeah. Do you know what it is? I think people maybe wanted to see how the first rounds went. That's probably true. And also sometimes law firms, we don't like to be the first one to say something. So you wait and see what everyone else does. And I think some firms as well might not be so black and white. So they may have a period of transition where they may give candidates an option, or, they'll consider you whether you've done the LPC, even if most of their intake's SQE. So I imagine it won't always be yes or no to the SQE. It may be a bit grey for a while. That might be why people haven't got a definite date in mind. But I think as students, don't let that worry you too much. Firms are sort of taking care of it, and they will have announcements for their futures and for the trainees joining them. They won't just leave them in the lurch.
But I think, just to reiterate, if you haven't yet started any conversion course or law degree, then you will be definitely going down the SQE route. So
Yeah.
you won't get an option that way. Let's have a look at question 4 now, and hopefully we'll be joined again by Rachel in a moment. Will firms be sticking, do you think, to the tried and tested seat rotation structure for qualifying work experience? And just to explain what that is for the non-lawyers, this is where students or trainees typically spend 6 months or so in what we call a seat in a law firm in a particular part of a particular department, and then they move every 6 months. Sometimes it could be 3 8-month seats, or something like that, where you get experience in different parts of the firm. Do you think most firms will be sticking to that for qualifying work experience? Have you heard of any particular changes that other firms are making, any innovations? Because the system has been liberalised so that it's easier to be a bit more flexible in terms of what students do. What's your
Yeah.
view?
Yeah, absolutely. So, seat rotations, as you say, going to different departments. I know we use lots of different language, so to different practice areas, we would call them. I think a lot of firms will keep them. I think one of the reasons that they're so great is that, we don't expect students, especially non-law students, to come in knowing exactly what they want to do in their career. So seat rotations give them a chance to, test different areas out and see where their skills fit and see what they enjoy. So I do imagine a number of firms will keep seat rotations. That's what I've heard. They may change the time period slightly. Oh, hi, Rachel. So they may keep the time period slightly different. Or what I've seen a number of firms doing is considering seats in non-traditional practice areas. So maybe spending 6 months in a project management role or a legal technology role, that sort of thing. So you may see a little bit more of that as well. And then a couple of firms have come out to say that they will be specialising trainees in one department for the whole period. So a few different routes out there, but I think the majority will still be seat rotation focused.
Yeah, do you have any spin you can put on that, Rachel? And welcome. Thank you again for joining us today. Just maybe you could just introduce yourself for the audience before we move on, and then we'll pick up that question with you. So,
Yes.
Rachel, where are you calling in from today? Which firm, and what's your role there?
Firstly, I'm so sorry. I had internet connection, so
Oh, don't worry.
that I dropped off there. But yeah, my name is Rachel Boyle. I'm the Early Careers Officer at Bird and Bird. So I'm in the Early Careers team. I previously worked at Withers Worldwide, so I've been in kind of law firms for the last 5.5 to 6 years now, but in HR, in various other roles for the last 10 years. So I'm delighted to be here speaking on this panel today and joining you, Johnny. And thank you very much for having me.
Good stuff. So the question was, do you think most firms will be sticking to the seat rotation structure for qualified work experience? And we have heard Rosie mention there's one or two firms who are innovating with non-traditional areas, but also almost like a one-seat training contract or one-seat qualifying work experience where you just work in one department for the whole 2 years and get a real deep exploration there. What's your view in terms of where the profession's going on this?
Yeah, I just caught the back end of what Rosie was saying there. I echo everything that she said. We think the training contract is really valuable because, as Rosie mentioned, people don't necessarily know what they want to specialise in and where their skills fit. So actually, I think the seat rotation is really valuable because it's a valuable way to ensure individuals get, a sense of all departments and all areas of the law before specialising in one particular area when they qualify. So I think it's really valuable experience. We are looking at different methods of qualification as well, and kind of that one route. I know there's kind of lots of discussion about the legal tech route, and as Rosie mentioned, the kind of project management piece as well. So we are looking at different aspects as well, but we are definitely going to keep the seat rotation. We think it's really valuable for people coming in.
And just really as a follow-up to this question, as many of the people watching probably won't know, that the old style training contract used to require firms to ensure that trainees had a combination of at least one litigious and one non-litigious, or contentious and non-contentious seat. Is that something that you guys are going to retain going forwards, or are you taking advantage of the flexibility there and will go in accordance with what the trainees want, or will the firms have policy in that regard? Rosie, what's your view on that? Or is there a review with Dentons? If there isn't, then just say we haven't worked that one out yet.
No, it's a good question. I don't know if Rachel, you find the same thing, but sometimes we get people come in the firm and really think they know that they are not interested in litigious seat at all, and then they do one and they really enjoy it. So sometimes having a little bit of structure, it helps people to really experience various practice areas. I've had a number of people who come in only wanting to do a corporate seat, and then they actually end up in dispute resolution or something, and loving it. So we won't have as hard and fast rules. I think it'll be more of a case by case, which I know is sometimes annoying to hear because it's not as black and white as an answer could be, but I think it'll probably be case by case. And we always work with our trainees to sort of figure out what their career plans are, but then also use our team's years of expertise to guide them into routes that they might not have traditionally thought that they wanted to go to.
And Rachel, what's your view in terms of does Bird and Bird have a view yet in terms of how we combine the seats that the trainees will do in terms of contentious and non-contentious, or are you going to be flexible?
Yeah, again, just echoing Rosie's points there. I think it's always valuable to have a mix of contentious and non-contentious work. We have a policy of no repeat seats just to make it fair and consistent across the whole training contract. And we really are quite firm with that, just because we want a completely fair process throughout the whole 2 years. But I think a mix, again, it will be guided by the trainee, but I think we will keep the mix of contentious and non-contentious work for sure.
Yeah, so what we can see just from two firms who are represented here this afternoon, everyone, is that at least with those two firms, and I think that does reflect the majority of the profession, we're going to be starting off with something that looks like an old style training contract, but will evolve over time. Great, but it's not the only model, as we've mentioned already. Let's move on and look at why firms actually hire non-lawyers as trainees, because that's the main reason why we're here today, to talk to the non-graduate audience. Maybe start off with Rachel this time. This is question number 5. What proportion of your trainees have been non-law graduates in the past? And you may want to contextualize this. I particularly wanted Bird and Bird on this panel because of the nature of the work you do, and you probably anticipated that anyway. So what proportion of your trainees have been non-law graduates, and why particularly for Bird and Bird?
Yeah, so we usually have a 50-50 split really of law and non-law graduates, and there's usually about 2 or 3 people who have STEM backgrounds, which is particularly great for our IP department. So I was just saying that we've actually just finished our 3rd assessment centre, and there's lots of doctors making career changes into law, lots of engineers, people who have studied maths, and we really appreciate and value that background. I think for us, it's really important to have a diverse cohort. You know, it's all about the diversity of thought. We don't just want a cookie cutter trainee. We appreciate individuals who bring different perspectives and experiences to the firm, and perhaps solve problems in a myriad of different ways. And I think actually, you know, a diverse trainee cohort just makes for, it's sensible business. You know, it creates different solutions for our clients, which in turn leads to profitability and competitive advantage for the firm. So financially it makes sense, but also ethically and morally, it also makes sense to have a diverse cohort of trainees. We're not focused on what an individual has done in their past, but what they can achieve in their future. I think that's really, really important. So we don't solely focus on a degree subject to the point where actually our interviewers don't even know the background of a candidate when they interview. So when they meet them, it's completely blind interviewing and they just get the name of the candidate. We in the early careers team know everything about that candidate, but the interviewers won't. So it will usually be a partner and associate and they won't know anything about that candidate. To stop unconscious or even conscious bias. So we've implemented that this year. So the application recruitment selection route is the same for all law and non-law students, and all have to meet the same criteria and answer the same questions.
Excellent. And if you just pop the same question briefly over to Rosie, what proportion of Denton's trainees historically have been non-law graduates, and would they be any different under the QWE regime?
Yeah, no, good question. So around 35 to 40% for us. It's not a set figure. It fluxes every year, and we don't particularly look to hire a quota of either law or non-law. And yeah, I imagine it will stay the same. As Rachel was mentioning, we want a diverse cohort as well. There is, if you look at our trainees, there is no sort of one type of trainee. We have career changes, people straight out of uni, people who have done various different degrees before they've come to law. So there's a huge range of people that bring different skills and experiences with them, which makes them a really sort of valuable cohort altogether. So I imagine it will stay pretty similar in terms of our numbers.
Fantastic. And presumably won't be any different under the QW regime at Bird and Bird either, I'm sure. Let's move on to our question number 7. Question number 8, I beg your pardon. What do you actually look for in a non-law graduate? I appreciate that you said they all have to satisfy a certain eligibility criteria, but I imagine that there are certain things that you're looking for in candidates that non-law graduates bring to the party more so than the law graduates, particularly at Bird and Bird, where you've got presumably a need for students with STEM backgrounds because of a lot of the IP, intellectual property work you do. So what is it you're looking for in terms of skill set and states of mind?
Yeah, again, another good question. It's all about passion for and interest for working in the law, but also passion and interest for working at Bird and Bird. What is it about Bird and Bird that is different from other law firms for you? I think that's initially what we're looking for. But I think it's also about transferable skills. If you don't have the legal work experience, obviously it's quite difficult to get that legal work experience for some people, especially for career changes who don't necessarily have the annual leave to take, who financially can't take that, who can't basically get the experience. Having those transferable skills. So, for example, if you've previously worked at H&M as a sales assistant, for example, you've got those customer relationship skills, and making that transferable into the role of a trainee solicitor. I think having those conversations with trainees or people who actually work in law firms as trainee solicitors, as associates, I think is really beneficial and can actually help you to understand the role of a trainee solicitor. But I think for us, it's about passion for Bird and Bird, for working as a lawyer. And I think it's about really tapping into those transferable skills, whether that be volunteer work, paid work, your current role.
Yeah, thanks. And maybe if I could ask Rosie just to put this question slightly approach it from a slightly different angle in terms of what skills would a non-lawyer bring from a non-law background, say a science, technology, and engineering and background. What would they bring that the non-lawyers might not have that you might be looking for?
Yeah, of course. So Denton's, you might have seen our brand is all around looking for challenges. So we're looking for people who think differently, and sort of challenge the way things have been done. So actually having someone from a STEM background brings lots of those skills, because they'll naturally be problem solving and innovating as part, I'm sure, of their studies and projects. So bringing that experience and explaining how much they enjoy problem solving and enjoy sort of changing the status quo, and how they can bring that to career in commercial law, would be really relevant for us.
Excellent, excellent. Now I'm going to move on to our final question of this section, because I know, because I've taught many students in the last sort of 14-15 years when I stepped down from being a partner, so 15 years or so at BPP, and I know that a lot of people who are non-lawyers suffer from what we might call imposter syndrome, because they've only been stuttering for a few months or up to a year before they might start an LPC or an SQE preparation course now, and they feel a perception of being undercooked. How do you can you tell who the non-lawyers are, or can anybody tell in practice who the non-lawyers are from the lawyers once they've gone through their formal education of a foundations course and uh, the SQE to come? Will they be distinguishable? Start off with Rachel, if we could do.
Yeah, of course. And that's a really good question. I think we haven't had that feedback from the past. And no partner or associate has come to us and kind of recognized the difference, to be completely honest. And I think actually the GDL, what's turning into the Pgdl, really provides a strong foundation for non-law graduates to get that foundation of law before the upcoming SQE. So I would say no from our experience. I
Yeah,
personally don't. No.
thanks. And how about you, Rosie? And I hope this is reassuring for you guys listening, because um, a lot of students do worry about how they are perceived. Rosie, what's your experience at Dentons with non-lawyers and how they're perceived?
Yeah, completely agree. I think by the time they start, when they've done their they will be doing the Pgdl and the SQE, I've never again heard any feedback. And I think the whole point of a training contract or qualifying work experience is to develop skills. So we're not expecting people to come knowing everything. We're really more looking for that attitude of wanting to learn and get stuck in. And that's the same for law and non-law students. And yeah, I've never had any feedback that we shouldn't be hiring non-law students or anything like that.
Hopefully that gives you a lot of encouragement, everyone out there. And I would just reiterate that I honestly cannot tell, when I'm teaching an LPC class at the moment, and when I'm sure go on to teach an SQE class, what the difference, who's done a law degree and who's done a conversion course, because the whole point of a conversion course, like what we used to call the Pgdl, now calling the Law Foundations course, the whole purpose of that is to get you to the same level with the core black letter law subjects that your LLB peers have studied. So you really are on a level playing field by the time you start an LPC, or in this case an SQE. But I think what's really important now is to sort of move on to the next section and talk about the training that non-lawyers get, because the whole system, everyone, has been liberalised by the regulator, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, to the extent that there is no prescribed training route that you need to go through to be able to sit the SQE assessments. You could, if you wanted to, just apply tomorrow for the assessments and take your chances. You'd probably fail, but there is no requirement for you to have gone through any sort of course at any particular provider at all. And therefore, there's quite a lot of innovation that's gone on, but there's quite a lot of courses of various different lengths, various different costs, and various different qualities, I think, to be absolutely honest. And it's very complicated in terms of the choices. And I suppose let's have a look at question 11 now. So, will firms require their trainees who are non-law graduates to complete a law conversion course before preparing for the SQE? And this is sort of the million-dollar question that the SRA say technically they don't have to, but I know from the answers that I think we heard right at the top before Rachel joined us. I think Rosie, you did indicate, I think, that you quite like the Pgdl or the Law Foundations course, and perhaps you could explain why.
Yeah, of course. So we want our trainees to get to us as well prepared as they can, and as we were saying just then, once someone's done that course and then the SQE, we can't see any difference between them and a law student. So it just puts them on the best footing. So we will be encouraging all of our non-law graduates to do the Pgdl or the Law Foundations course. We will also sponsor them through it, so we cover the cost and also give a maintenance grant, which I think a number of firms will do. It won't be 100% mandatory, so we will discuss on a case-by-case basis if someone has done an international law degree perhaps, or they've worked as a paralegal for a long time, a number of years, then maybe we feel that they can go straight to the SQE, but we essentially want our future trainees to start on the best footing possible, and we feel like doing that course is really going to help them get there, so we'll support them through it.
Thanks. What's Bird and Bird's view then, Rachel?
Completely agree with Rosie. So we really value the Pgdl and the GDL that it is now as a foundation for non-law graduates, and it levels the playing field with non-law graduates who, with people who have studied law. And as Rosie mentioned, it just puts people on the best footing. So we will be sponsoring people through the Pgdl before the SQE and providing a maintenance grant as well. So we really do see the value in that.
Yeah, so I think the exceptions that Rosie mentioned make sense if you're, say, an internationally qualified lawyer, or maybe you've worked in practice for 5 or 10 years and really got a really good background in the law, but haven't gone through the formal legal training, academic training. But if you're straight out of uni, I think the conclusion from both of you is that really you need to be going on to a Law Foundations course or Pgdl. That's useful to know. So from your perspective, have you noticed, because it's going back to the imposter syndrome thing, just to reassure students, that the performance of the students who are non-lawyers is any different in their assessments? So when they've done the LPC historically, have they performed any better or any worse than their LLB peers, or is there no discernible difference? Rachel?
Quite frankly, no, there's no difference. And we haven't even looked at the analysis. We don't even carry out that analysis of looking at law versus non-law students and whether they perform differently, because we just see them that actually they've all done some sort of study of the law. And actually, we haven't seen any difference. So hopefully that reassures some of you.
Good. And at the risk of breaking out in complete agreement, Rosie, what's your view? Similar?
Yeah,
or?
the same. Again, we haven't analysed it, and it's never been raised, which is always a good sign. If it's not been raised, it's not an issue.
Mm-hmm.
So we won't have seen any difference from the LPC results.
Yeah, I think what is likely to happen going forward is that there will be some non-law students who do chance their arm on an SQE. We wouldn't allow our students on our SQE preparation courses without having done a foundation, because we believe in it so strongly. But there are other places that will allow students to go straight onto an SQE course, and I do worry for, it's a lot of money to be putting on the line for the central assessments before you've even paid for the provider, with not quite the same level of training as the people you're up against, and it is a competitive process. So I would say, you're investing in your future. You only get an opportunity to do it once, so make the most of it and give yourself the best chance of going forward. Let's now have a look at question number 13. What about a student who aspires to work in your firm, who intends to self-finance their solicitor's qualifying examination? Is there an expectation that somebody who has self-financed themselves up to the point of qualifying through the SQE, is there an expectation that they should have the law conversion course? I mean, you've said that they have, you have a preference particularly for the university leavers, but would you? I think I've got the impression that you would consider certainly applications from some students who hadn't done a law conversion course. Let's just make it really clear that there's no expectation that all students would have them, but that's the exception rather than the rule. Just wanted to clarify that was the case. Rosie?
Yeah, so I hate to use the phrase again, but it would be probably case by case with NQ roles. It really would depend what their qualifying work experience had been and what they've done before they're getting to that stage of being ready to be a newly qualified solicitor in terms of those roles. So yeah, it would be case by case. I think if someone had done quite sporadic qualifying work experience and maybe not at comparable firms, that might be something that we would want to see that foundation. Whereas if they had maybe had really comparable work experience for a large number of years and passed the SQE, then we would probably assume that they were up to scratch to start with us as an NQ. So probably not the most helpful answer, but it is case by case, I think.
Yeah. So this is crossing over with our question number 14, I think, as well, in terms of, how would you view a newly qualified with or without the law conversion course? And I think we've had that point answered. Let's move on to question 15, if we could do, and I'll ask you, Rachel, what type of roles do you find that non-lawyers qualify into? Do they tend to favour certain types of roles because of their science or undergraduate background, whatever that is? How does it tend to work at Bird and Bird?
Yeah, there's no distinction really. You would expect that STEM students would qualify more into the IP department, which sometimes is the case, but actually when they have done their whole 2-year training contract, actually they find that there is an interest in another department, which is again going back to the value of the seat rotation over the 2 years. People come in with a set idea of being an IP lawyer because of their STEM background, but actually they've had experience in employment, for example, and then they love that and then they qualify into that. So we obviously have had STEM students, people with a STEM background qualifying into IP, but there's no real distinction between law and non-law qualifying into particular roles, to be honest.
Okay, what about your experience, Rosie? Do they tend to favour particular roles? I mean, looking at our question number 16, are there any opportunities that would be particularly open to non-law graduates that maybe they'd be more suited to than the law graduates particularly?
Yeah, of course. I think, like Rachel, we don't see a huge difference in where people qualify. I think similarly to how you were saying, STEM students might think IP is more suited. I sometimes think law students think contentious seats might be more suited than non-law, but actually it doesn't always come out that way. So it really is different for every person. And in terms of opportunities, we don't have any opportunities that aren't open to law students or non-law students. All our opportunities are sort of open throughout. I think the only difference is, if we're assessing a non-law student, particularly at early stages, we're not going to expect them to know all the things that a law student would know. So don't be put off if you're seeing an opportunity that's open to both. We will adjust sort of what we're looking for. And as Rachel said, we're really looking for potential rather than legal knowledge. So don't worry if opportunities aren't non-law specific. It doesn't mean they're not accessible.
Thank you. I think we'll just pause there with the pre-prepared questions because I see we've got quite a lot that have come up in the chat, and maybe we'll get through some of those now. There's one here from Amber Bird. Thanks for your question that I'll answer. She says, I've heard, this is the one at 403, I've heard that the old examinations used to be open book. Will SQE be structured the same? Now, under the LPC, there was a variation between different providers. At BPP, we currently have all our LPC exams as open book, partly as a response to the fact that during the pandemic, we were obviously forced to hold our exams online, but they work so effectively and so well. We've retained that. But for the SQE going forward, because they're all centrally set exams and have to be held under similar conditions on a level playing field, you'll take those assessments at Pearson test centres, which are the sort of place you go to take your driving test. So there will be no open book policy. It will be completely closed book for the SQE. Okay. We've answered Lucy's question, but let's have a look at Annie's question at 407. So can quasi-legal work, maybe Sam, you could get this up because it's quite a long question, but it's a good question. Annie 407 says, can quasi-legal work count towards qualifying work experience? For instance, if I'm working on the management or corporate governance, regulatory or compliance, or things like this that utilize legal skills count towards qualifying work experience? This is a really good question. Any views on this? And I know we're all very new to qualifying work experience and still working it out, but I've got a view, but I'll ask you guys first. So Rachel, any thoughts on that?
That's a very good question. I think it needs to be signed off, as far as I'm aware. So as long as it's signed off, I think it can count towards your QWE if it's signed off appropriately. So I would say to just check if that work experience can be signed off at the kind of
Yeah, it needs to be signed off by an English qualified lawyer or the compliance officer for legal practice in the law firm. So if it's in a law firm or even if it's in industry, if you're working in a legal department or doing quasi-legal work like regulation, generally speaking, it's capable of counting. Maybe if I could flip the question on its side, Rosie, what happens if a student comes to a law firm with something like this work experience and they get the training contract, or what we're now calling a qualifying work experience with you, and say, I've got a year's worth of this? Would you say you only need to do a year's worth with the firm, or would you say no, all our trainees go through a 2-year program?
Yeah, really good question. And for us, it will be the minimum of 18 months on a training contract. So we'll be able to take 6 months off, but that will really depend on what that experience is. So it's not kind of a rule for everybody. It will be very dependent on what sort of work experience they've been doing and if we think it's relevant to Dentons. Because again, similarly, as we were saying for trainees, we want our newly qualified associates to start as associates on the best footing. And if we feel like doing, 4 seats with us and 2 years with us is going to be the best way for them to do that, then that's something we'll encourage. And also doing the full 2 years does give you 4 opportunities to try different areas before you qualify somewhere. So it can be really valuable. But it'll be, again, one that we chat with our trainees, but it would never be just a year. It would always be at least 18 months.
Yeah, I've heard some firms who would still insist and that for good reasons for people going through the 2 years, but I can also see that if it's been good quality work, then giving them a credit might make sense. Any particular view? I know a lot of people are still working out a lot of these things. I don't know whether Bird have made a decision on this yet at all.
No, we're still defining what that looks like for us. So yeah, we're still defining what the QWE looks like. But
that's fine, and I think you're in the majority there. I think it's quite a difficult question to answer. I was sure that every firm would look at this on a case-by-case basis anyway, because if it really is excellent work you got there, Annie, then from a firm's point of view, getting you qualified sooner rather than later, if you are at that level already almost, then it makes commercial sense as much as anything else. Good stuff. Let's move on and have a look at Grace's question is a good one, although I might slightly reword it. Grace at 408. Are there any other options besides a training contract that's recognised as qualifying work experience? Or, well, it's not going to be called a training contract anymore, but are there other ways you can do qualifying work experience? And I'm thinking, well, there are things like graduate apprenticeships and solicitor apprenticeships that are out there where effectively you qualify under the SQE regime that way. Is that something that either of your firms are considering at the moment in terms of graduate apprenticeships, where you combine the work and the study in the same period of time?
Yes, at Dentons we have a solicitor apprenticeship, so that's for school leavers rather than graduates. So I'm not sure it would apply too much to our audience today, but it's anyone who's not commenced a degree can start with us, and it's 6 years long. They study 1 day a week, work 4 days a week, and they do the SQE and also a law degree over that time, and end up in exactly the same place as someone who's done a training contract or the qualifying work experience route. And then I guess, Grace, as well, the other answer to your question is yes, you could do 4 6-month opportunities in different places. It doesn't have to be a traditional sort of training contract model. But again, I think with that, what you want to make sure is that experience is really related to where you want to end up, because those associate roles at the end will be looking for you to have relevant work experience. So important to consider not just how much you get, but what you're getting as well.
Fabulous. Let's move on and see if we can. I think Bhakti's question at 413 is quite a good one. What things are most important to keep in mind when applying for a training contract or qualifying work experience? Being a recruiter, what would you prefer to be different in the application? So what are you looking for to make a student stand out, a candidate stand out then, Rachel?
I think for us, it's about doing your research. So we have a sector-specific question on our application form, and we really need it to be related to our sectors. You'd be so surprised the amount of answers that we get that's related to departments or sectors that aren't at Bird and Bird. So I know it sounds very simple, but answering the question on the application form and making sure you do your research, your background research on the firm. And yeah, I would say do your research, undertake as much work experience as possible, whether that be virtual work experience or in-person work experience. We have a brilliant virtual work experience with Forage, and I'll put the link in the chat at the end of this panel, which is brilliant. And just attend as many opportunities with law firms as possible, as many recruiters as possible. Try and get a feel for the culture that you want to work in, to really try and understand the role of a trainee and what that entails, and to help you explain why you want to be a lawyer at the end of the day. That's obviously a question that's going to come up at the assessment centre and in the interview. So do your research would be my number one piece of advice.
Thank you. And I think what we'll do, just because the volume of questions we've got, we'll just alternate between the two of you for the questions. Annie has asked two questions. We'll take Annie's second question. Bearing in mind, Dentons have quite a substantial international footprint. Annie said, what advice do you have for international applicants?
Yeah, of course. So we consider international applicants exactly the same as we would non-international applicants in terms of their application. There's nothing special that they have to do. I think on the motivation piece, we might want to understand why you've decided to pursue a career with Dentons in the office that you're applying to. But other than that, I think just bring all of your experiences from your international experience or your studies and those transferable skills, and show that, yeah, all of those things that you've developed. In terms of sponsorships, I know you've mentioned that there, most firms will sponsor for training contracts, so not something for you to be worried about, and it wouldn't ever disadvantage you. And also for a firm like Dentons, when you're answering the question, why Dentons, you obviously have an international background, so use that to your advantage and explain why it's important for you to work somewhere that reflects your background as well.
Fantastic. Annie's been very prolific on the questions, but she's asked a really excellent one at 4:24. So we'll pass that one over to Rachel. So Annie was wondering how, particularly, and this is particular for non-law students, it's been very hard to get work experience or VAC schemes and mini pupilages. So she's wondering how not doing a VAC scheme or mini pupilage is viewed, particularly if you're an international student. Is it best that you get that experience before applying, or something else? She said, or would QWE be enough for you to get on in the profession? So how much work experience are you expecting, I suppose, particularly from international students? But I think it probably applies to all students.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you, Annie. I would say try and get as much experience as possible, whether that be virtual or not, as I mentioned. But I think, again, going back to the previous answer, again, making sure that all of your work experience is transferable. So whether that be non-law, law, and I think actually for work experience, I think whilst it is important and it's an important part of the application, if you make everything transferable, I don't think it's an essential part. As I mentioned, we are looking for the potential of what someone can bring to the firm, and I think we have got set competencies, and we just want to see your passion and motivation for law. I think QWE is important, and you know it can bring a lot to your application, but I think it's not essential. So my piece of advice to you would be to just make sure everything is transferable, whether that be volunteer work, whether that be, you know, your part-time work, and make sure everything on your application is transferable.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've had two questions in from Sarah D and Claire that are very similar. Can we just show Sarah D's question at 4:31? If we could do, Sam, that'd be great. So Sarah D is a career changer. So this is one for Rosie, not because she's a career changer, but you're next. So in her 30s, will it be hard for her to get a training contract? Will I be the eldest amongst my peers who are recent graduates? And then Claire said, and I'm in my 40s and was wondering the same. I teach many people who are in their 50s and 60s, and I have taught people in their 70s, and they've gone on to careers. But what's your experience, certainly at Denton's, Rosie?
Yeah, of course. Well, I don't know if it's comforting, but we hear this question a lot, which means you're not the only person out there who has that concern, which means there are lots of people who aren't straight out of university. So it really makes no impact for us. Our trainee cohort is really different. So as I say, we have people who have come straight out of uni, but we have people who've worked in other sectors or other industries for years. So a huge range of ages. And what I'll say as well is, you're not with your trainee cohort most of the time anyway. You're in your teams, and our teams are made up of all sorts of different people of different ages and backgrounds. So it's not like you're with everybody who's on the training contract working together all the time, even if they were all straight out of uni, which isn't the case. So you'll really just become part of whichever team you're sitting in, and that will have sort of no impact. And also, I'm sure you'll have had some sort of previous experience, whether kind of directly related or not, and that's going to really benefit you actually in applications and also when you start with us as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to recognise, particularly because we are talking to a non-law audience, that we do tend to get a lot of career changers who, almost by definition, have been non-lawyers because they've done something else not in the law before coming over to us, and therefore they are going to be older, and therefore you're certainly not alone as a career changer. And yeah, just my experiences, I talk people 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I see Jean's asked a question about 60s. I've taught somebody in their 70s, Jean. So there are people, you won't be alone, certainly in going through the system. Let's have a look at another question if we can do. Yeah, good question from Sarika, actually, and this is more of a general question. Can you, this is 433 Sarika, can you do some qualifying work experience whilst actually studying for the Pgdl or the Sqe exams? If you do, does this mean you don't need 2 years qualifying work experience following the exams to qualify? So certainly I can probably answer that and offer it to Rosie and Rachel to add anything. We have part-time courses that are out there, so you can certainly work and study at the same time, but it won't well, if you are doing qualifying work experience whilst you're studying, and it is possible, then in that sense you could reduce the overall time it takes you to qualify. But if you are doing qualifying work experience, it's going to be quite a commitment alongside even a part-time course, and some students manage that and manage it very well, but you've got to be incredibly organized to make sure it happens, and not have too many distractions, because holding down a demanding job, which any qualifying work experience will be demanding, alongside a part-time course, it's doable, but you've got to make sure all your ducks are lined up, so to speak, so that you can focus on your work and your studies and really prioritize those. So hopefully that makes sense. So you still need to do 2 years qualifying work experience, but you would be doing that alongside your studies, which is a bit like the graduate apprentice model. Okay. Okay, let's have a look at another question. Let's have a look. Oh, good question from Emily, actually. Emily, 439, this is, what's the best way to prepare for a vacation scheme as a non-law student? Anybody want to offer an answer? Rosie,
Yeah,
Rachel?
I don't mind jumping in for a second.
Okay.
I'll pass to you in a second, Rachel. Yeah, so again, we don't expect people to join the VAC scheme knowing anything about law or how it works in practice particularly. That's what the whole point of the scheme is for. But I think to prepare, I would say keeping on top of commercial awareness, and I know commercial awareness is one of those terms that is a bit indefinable sometimes, but there's lots of good podcasts or sort of news blasts that you can be on. So just knowing what's going on in the world and thinking about how that might be discussed on your VAC scheme. You don't need to be an expert, but having an opinion is always a good idea. And then also what lots of firms will do is give you feedback from any assessments you've done prior to the vacation schemes. So having a think about what that feedback was and how you can act on it in the VAC scheme is a really good idea as well. But most firms will not expect you to be coming with any sort of in-depth experience. The whole point of the scheme is to sort of get to know the firm and show your skills. I don't know if that's the same for you, Rachel.
Yeah, no, completely echo everything that you've just said. We also send out a briefing document for everyone who attends our vacation scheme. So again, just keeping on top of commercial awareness, being organised, networking with as many people as possible when you're on the vacation scheme. And I think obviously we want to get the best. We want people to perform at their best in the vacation scheme, but you are being assessed the whole time. So even on socials and things, whilst we want people to have fun, I would just say to just have that element of self-awareness, and just make sure that, yeah, I mean, obviously have fun as well and enjoy the experience. At the end of the day, if you don't get the training contract, you can put it on your CV as an element of work experience. So I think it's going to be valuable to you either way.
Do you make any allowances for the fact that somebody is a non-law student if something is dealing in a context that is a legal situation in any activity you run? Do you make any allowances in that regard, or are the activities so broad that they don't require any previous legal knowledge, Rachel?
Yeah, we've made all activities so broad that you don't actually require any previous legal knowledge. As I mentioned before, we're running the group assessment during the vacation scheme because we think it's just fairer to have in person rather than virtual, and that doesn't require any prior legal knowledge, essentially.
Excellent. We've got about 5 minutes to go, so let's just see if we can just brush through a few more questions. Alice has made a good question at 4:39 as well. How about the few? I'll take this one. How about a few students which are currently sitting the Pgdl? That's the law conversion course. Will that be? Will there be a choice between the training contract route or the SQE? And do you see one option better than the other? Is basically the question. Well, first of all, let's make it really clear. If you're currently on a Pgdl, provided that you started it, and this is the cutoff date, prior to the 1st of January 22, and provided you accepted your place on that course by the 1st of September 22, then you are eligible to go either way down the LPC or the SQE route. But most people who are probably on this call at the moment haven't yet started their law conversion journey yet, and therefore you would definitely go down the SQE route. But when it comes to the firms, though, guys, when you get an applicant who could go either way, is it the case that you're basically saying if you're going in this cohort, you will be going down the training, the SQE route or the LPC route, or do they get any element of choice, Rachel?
They do get an element of choice. I would say our 2024 cohort, obviously we are transitioning into the SQE route. But again, it's just, going back to the case by case basis, it depends on what they have done previously. But yeah, obviously as we're transitioning into the SQE route, it will be kind of more towards that avenue.
Okay, and for you, Rosie, is there now? I think Dentons have made a decision, haven't they, in terms of when your first SQE cohort is going to be? Is there ever going to be a mixed cohort?
Yeah, a good question. So anyone starting with us 2023, so starting their training contract or starting their qualifying work, so it's 2023, will do their Pgdl LPC. Anyone starting with us 2024, so starting with us then, will do the SQE. The slight caveat being to that, if we're getting people who have applied who've already completed both the GDL and the LPC, then we will consider them for 2024. But we often get people who haven't quite got to that stage. We normally sponsor people through. So there may be a little bit of a mix in 2024, but anyone who we hire before they've commenced the courses will do the SQE route.
Thank you. And I think we'll just take one or two more. I got one from Sarika at 4:42. This is really one probably for me rather than for you guys. Can we add an additional module onto the Pgdl to make it into a master so we can get postgraduate student financing? I think the second part of the question is one that Rachel and Rosie could answer in a moment. Certainly the answer to the first part of the question is if you start the course as a master's, then you can get the postgraduate financing because you would have committed to our Law Foundations course or our Pgdl plus the first part of the SQE preparation course. So we have a master's that wraps up the Law Foundations course and the SQE1 preparation. So that makes sense from having enough credits, and will, if it's your first master's and you're otherwise eligible, attract postgraduate government funding. And for those of you who don't know, that's quite a sizable chunk. It's going to be £11,836 next academic year, and 11,570 I think it is now. So that's one way to finance both your Law Foundations course, your Pgdl, and your first part of your SQE1 assessments. And that's a very cost-effective way of doing it, and also from a cash flow perspective, a great way to fund it, because it obviously it's not free money, you'll have to pay it back, but it is wrapped up as a student loan. Would you count the master's version as equivalent to the Pgdl? If you do a master's that wraps up in, it's the same course but with extra modules, presumably the case is, yeah, there's no difference for you guys.
Yeah, we do. Just to say that actually we only require the kind of GDL. So actually you're kind of adding more work to yourself to get the master's. Obviously it's great to have a master's, but I have found that actually lots of trainees who have then started their training contract, who have for one reason or another had to kind of defer their dissertation, have found it extremely stressful, and they've kind of been like, oh, I kind of just needed, you know, the GDL or the LPC, and actually I've decided to do a master's and it's been a bit more stressful. But actually, you know, you can't, a master's is equally as valuable, and you can never, you can't take that away. So I think it's dependent on the person's choice.
Yeah, there's different masters you can get with us. You can do the masters with a professional project, like a dissertation, and you can do the masters with the SQE1. And I think the first one, I can see that being challenging sometimes to students if they defer it, but the SQE1 added on top is very useful because obviously it's the next step that students will go on to, and therefore that becomes quite useful. Well, guess what, guys? We've clocked around to 5 o'clock. And there's plenty more questions out there. So I promise you we will answer the ones we haven't managed to answer in the FAQs that we will send through to you. It just really remains for me to thank Rachel and Rosie for being with us this afternoon, and maybe leave us with a parting shot. Question number 17, what advice would you give to non-law undergraduates looking to convert to law? In a line, Rosie, what advice would you give to undergraduates looking to convert?
Yeah, I think just think about all of the transferable skills you have, and don't see being non-law as a disadvantage, but think of all the advantages that you can bring with you from that experience.
Brilliant. And finally, you, Rachel?
Yeah, I would say transferable skills, and do your research as much as possible. Do as much virtual work experience as you can.
There's lots of it out there, so take advantage of it. Well, thank you so much, both of you. I think we're going to welcome back Legal Cheek now, who are going to sort of do the handover to the networking. But I know that Rosie, you need to shoot off. So thank you so much indeed for joining us. I think Rachel will be able to join us for the first few minutes of the networking, certainly. And yep, see you soon. Thank you very much, Rosie. That was fantastic today.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And over to Jamina, who's going to explain what happens next.
Yes, thank you very much, speakers, for such a great discussion. And thank you also to everyone in the audience. It's been great to see so many questions coming through in the chat. Now, this is unfortunately all we have time for in the panel discussion, but everyone in the audience, don't go anywhere yet, as we are only halfway through the event. Now we have an hour of virtual networking where you can follow up with Johnny and Rachel, meet current BPP students who are non-law graduates, as well as trainees from BCLB. The speakers are just on their way to the expo to take their places in the booth, but everyone in the audience, stay where you are, and I will just explain a bit more about how the networking will run. So just as a reminder, a recording of today's session will be made available 1 month from today in the SQE Hub on Legal Cheek, and one of the team will put a link to the SQE Hub in the chat, so make sure you grab that link and save it somewhere for yourself. And next up, you will all head over to the expo in the left-hand sidebar, where you will see 2 booths for you. Now, one of them is the Meet the Speakers booth, where we have Johnny and Rachel answering all of your questions. And a second booth is where you can meet BCLB current trainees, who will be joined by BPP students who are non-law graduates. Now, when you go into a booth, remember to click the blue button that says Share Audio and Video to ask your questions face-to-face for the best networking experience. Now, all there is left to do is click on Expo in the left-hand sidebar and get to networking. I will see you all over there.